And I remember one story that Grandma used to tell me that when they were warming tobacco, she would slip up in the row behind him and listen to him talk because he talked to himself. And one thing he would say is, "It takes all I can rake and scrape to buy books." But he, as you can see, was a pretty good man and owned a lot of land in here and divided it between his children. Grandma Josephine Woodall Humphreys got 13 acres adjoining Grandpa's 26 acres just out here to the north of us, about 100 yards. And Aunt Sari had a piece in here and a piece across the creek, across Wills Creek. And Uncle Eb had a piece over behind us to the right, abutting this cemetery. It was the land that Uncle Eb had, and Uncle Henry had the land that the cemetery is on, and some land on down the creek in the south of us.
Now, Uncle Clement, who was, say for the record here on the videotape, who Josephine Woodall was in relation to our family?
Josephine Woodall married J.J. Jacob Jr. Humphreys, my grandfather.
Okay. Now, okay, Josephine Woodall, and for a while she was up in the sanitarium at Spencer, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. This is a panorama of the Woodall Cemetery where Grandma Lydia and Grandpa Eric are buried. There's their graves that we saw earlier. And it's called the Woodall Cemetery on Wills Creek near Elkview, West Virginia. And the reason it's called the Woodall Cemetery was because it was on land owned by the Reverend A. Woodall, whose grave we just looked at, and he was the father of Josephine Woodall, who was the mother of Eric Vinton Humphreys, Grandma Liddy's husband.
Here we're looking at Grandpa Humphreys and Grandma Humphreys stone. Of course, this is Jacob J., another J.J. Humphreys, and Josephine Woodall Humphreys, the mother and father of Eric Humphreys, my father, Mike's grandfather, and of course these folks are great grandfather and grandmother to Mike. They lived just over on the next farm.
This grave is Estill E. Humphreys, known as Tom Humphreys. He was the son of Jacob Jr. and Josephine Humphreys, and a brother to Eric Vinton Humphreys, the husband of Liddy Humphreys. And Tom was killed in a car wreck in 1935 on Bigley Avenue. And here is the grave of William A. Humphreys, William Arthur Humphreys, who at the age of 4 years old drowned in a mill pond. And he was known as Arthur, and he was the son of Jacob Jr. and Josephine Woodall, and was a brother of Eric Vinton Humphreys. This is the grave of Robert E. Humphreys, Uncle Bob, who was a brother of Eric Vinton Humphreys. All right, here we are at the top of the hill looking down the cemetery. And Uncle Clement, go ahead and say what you were going to say.
Well, what I want to say is that this cemetery is on the land owned by Uncle Henry Woodall, but in the days when I was young, 16, 17, 18, 19, maybe even older than that, years old, there seldom was anyone brought up the hill through Uncle Henry's land. We came through Uncle Ev's land where we had to ford Wills Creek, and usually the vehicle that hauled the body would park on the side of Wills Creek opposite the cemetery, and the young boys would carry it across the creek. I've rolled my pants up and carried caskets across there, and I've done it without rolling my pants up and be wet up to my waist in the wintertime, and then we'd carry the casket on up the hill through Uncle Ev's property, steep as could be, on the east side of the cemetery. And then later we got a road up the hill through Uncle Henry's property, which was then owned by Deb Moulds. Got a road up that they could bring a vehicle up to the cemetery. And now, as you can see, Mike will probably turn this camera on the end of the road that we built that's left since they built the interstate, and we have a very good access to the cemetery now. You going?
I think so. Here's the Interstate 79, where it comes up through Wills Creek. Here's the road. Here's the road up to the Woodall Cemetery. And now we're pointing the camera up into the area where the family, Liddy and Eric Vinton, moved in 1924. And here to talk about that is Uncle Clement.
If you point your camera right through this slot right over here,
I'm
and you can see the tallest knob back there. The house we lived in was to the left of that knob and down the hill 300 feet from the top of that knob. The only way to get there was by walking, riding a horse, or riding a sled. I saw, in all the time we've been around that place up there, I saw one vehicle with wheels back there. That's where we moved in 1924. We moved from South Charleston to that particular place where there's a nice old white house with a wonderful big fireplace and a good deep well that we enjoyed so much. We kept a cider press out there with that well in the summertime, and that's where we made cider from the apples that dropped off the different trees. We had there were 2 wonderful orchards on that farm when we bought it, and any man that wanted to farm could have made a living right there. Now where we're standing now is probably what we call the upper end of Grandpa Humphrey's bottom land. There was an orchard along here, and then if you turn around just right down where this stick's pointing was Grandpa's house. It was down by the creek, and over there that hollow was Aunt Sarah Douglas's house. She was great grandpa William A. Douglas's daughter, and that's the land she inherited on that side of the creek. The interstate has changed it so much. Off here to our left was bottom land that belonged to Grandpa Humphreys. That's where he raised his cane to make sorghum. They called it molasses. It was sorghum molasses that they made every year. It was a great social event. And there's so many things that happened here that it's just hard for me to keep from talking about them, but I know I'd never get it all told. So it was, in a way, a sad, wonderful life that we lived when I was a youngster.
Now, right across this gap up here, straight through there, if you walk across that hill, you come out on Riley Branch, is that correct?
That's right.
And Riley Branch is on Elkview, and that's where Grandma moved up to a farm after
The other way.
the other way?
She lived on Riley Branch, and when he died, she moved down to
Down to Elkview. So they lived on Riley Branch, and that's on the Elkview Road, right near the a little drive-in place used to be called the Toot 'em and Tell 'em, right? Toot and Tell 'em.
Artifacts.
We're standing on the site of a log cabin that was occupied by, what were their names?
Burdette, Grandma and Grandpa Burdette.
Grandpa and Grandma Burdette. And Liddy Humphreys was born in that log cabin, and Robert Jr. Humphreys, my father, was born in that log cabin. And it stood on this site, and this is Michael. And when I was a little boy, below the age of 12, my dad and mom took the family and we went up there and we spent the night with Grandpa Burdette. And I'll never forget asking my grandfather, I mean my own father, if he thought that Grandpa Burdette had any old Civil War swords up in the attic that he'd let me play with. And on this site right here, Uncle Clement was telling us that there was an old rock Indian mound.
No,
Not rock,
here.
earth?
This is earth.
An earth Indian mound. My misunderstanding. An earth Indian mound built by the Native Americans was located on this site. In the bottomland of the creek where we came up, Uncle Clement was telling us that as a boy, when it was plowed, they found numerous arrowheads, and so Indians lived in this hollow here.
And there was a rock mound up there in the woods.
And then there was a rock mound that was further up in the woods, and
Grandpa
it
and Dad dug it out and had to quit because they didn't move the rocks far enough out.
it was dug out, but they had to quit because they didn't move the rocks far enough.
This is Nellie Burdette Cyrus. We're special, Nellie and I. We played together, we played house, built furniture out of thistle blossoms when we were 10, 11, 12 years old, and then all the time that she was married, which was a long time. We didn't see a lot of each other because I was busy raising my children, she was raising her children. But she is my mother's sister. Nellie's my aunt. I'm a year older than she is, but she's still my aunt. You want to tell him anything?
Although I'm 86 years old.
You were born in what year?
1914.
1914. And the sister of Liddy.
Liddy.
Yeah, Grandma Liddy. And tell us a little bit about your mother and father.
George.
Your mother and father.
Grandpa Burdette.
Yeah.
Where was he raised?
My dad was raised on on Jake's Fork.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother was raised in Elkview.
Mm-hmm. And her name was?
Mary Elizabeth James.
Mary Elizabeth James. Okay. And
And she's the one that married Louis Brooklyn, and he died. And she married Grandpa Burdette.
mm-hmm.
And I thought more of him than I did most of the people that were related to me. I'll tell you that.
Uh-huh.
And he was a smart man. If you look around, every one of his boys and grandchildren out here are foremen on some, wherever they're working. They're in those top labor
Mm-hmm.
positions. No white collar executives among them, but
Mm-hmm.
there's one of them that I know they paid him a company just to get him to come back, paid him $3,700 a week and expenses.
Hmm.
So they're a smart breed.
How about the James? Is there any of the Jameses around from your mother's, on your mother's side?
No, I don't.
They're all
No.
dead.
They're all.
They're all gone. And this is because of the James connection. My sister Ann always, of course this was wrong, but she always claimed she was related to Jesse James.
Yeah.
She
They
was.
used, Yeah, they say that we
but
are a little.
not that Jesse.
Not that Jesse. A different Jesse James.
But there are three Jesse James in Grandpa James's lineage.
Mm-hmm. But not the outlaw Jesse James.
No,
All
but
right.
it's a family name
Right.
because my great 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 grandfather was Jesse James. Okay.
All right. Here we are at Elkview at the intersection of 119, which follows the Elk River up toward Clendenin from Charleston, and the road over the hill that goes to Interstate 79. Now at the intersection of these two roads is the cemetery known as Reynolds Cemetery. And this is the cemetery that we're going to visit today, where Grandpa Brookman, great-grandpa Brookman are buried. Grandpa Brookman was the father of Liddy Humphreys. All right.
This is the grave of C.S. Humphreys, known as Thad. He was my grandpa Humphrey's brother. He was the father of Colin. Now Thad Humphreys married Grandpa Brookman's daughter, Virginia, and Virginia married Thad Humphreys.
All right, and the tombstone says C.S. Humphreys, born June the 15th, 1861, died November the 5th, 1888. So he would have died being 27 years old.
Well, this is just the neatest thing I've ever.
Just to clarify this, C.S. Humphreys was the uncle of Eric Vinton Humphreys and the brother of Jacob Jr. Humphreys, Eric Vinton Humphreys' father. Eric Vinton's grandfather was known as Jacob Judy, and C.S. Humphreys would have been a son of Jacob Judy Humphreys.
And be sure to say he was referred to as Thad,
He was known as Thad.
and he married my mother's aunt, Virginia Brookman.
And he married Liddy's Aunt Virginia Brookman. Right, here we are on the side of the tombstone of C.S. Humphreys that we've just looked at, and it's marked Harriet A., wife of I.I. Humphreys, born April J.J. Humphreys, thank you, born April the 12th, 1835, and died December the 12th, 1888.
She was Jacob Judy's wife.
Harriet
After
was
he came to this part of the country, to Wills Creek and Grapevine, he went back to Virginia and brought Harriet Taylor with him as his wife. And of course they lived on Wills Creek and Grapevine. They lived on Wills Creek when she died and when he died. She was the mother of Jacob Jr., my grandpa. She's my great-great-grandmother. Excuse me, she's my great-grandmother and Mike's great-great-grandmother. And as Mike told you, the rest of what's on the tombstone.
and her last name was Taylor.
Taylor.
Harriet Taylor.
Yeah.
And notice how the carver of the tombstone here spelled wife, W-I-E-F. This is Lori, who's using shaving cream to bring out the lettering of these old tombstones.
What you learned when you run out with me, Lord.
This is the other side of the same tombstone, and it reads Victoria, daughter of F.A. and V.F. Humphreys, born July the 1st, 1891, died October the 28th, 1895, and below that it says, the sweet remembrance of the just shall last when they have turned to dust.
This is the grave, as Mike just said, Victoria And always in family legend she was referred to as Little Victoria. And I heard about her many, many times. She died at the age of 4 and was buried here with her aunt, Harriet. She was the daughter of Holt. Of course, they called him F.A., and the F stands for Flavius, I believe. There's 3 graves here, or 3 epithets filled on this one tombstone. That's C.S. Thad, who married Virginia Brookman, mother's aunt, and Victoria, who was Holt's daughter, and who was also, she was Virginia's daughter because at that time Thad had died and Aunt Jenny married Holt, and they had Victoria, as we said half a dozen times, who had now died. And we think, while there's 3 graves listed on this tombstone, we think that there's a 3rd grave here where Harriet's husband, Jacob Judy Humphreys, was buried, though there's no reference to him on the marker. And of course, he died much later than she.
And
so we believe that we have 4 relatives in this little plot right here.
And Jacob Judy would have been Jacob Jr.'s father, the grandfather of Eric Vinton Humphreys.
Yeah.
The sweet remembrance of the just shall flourish when they sleep in dust.
Family here? Uh-huh.
Well, his half-brother and sister. Jenny.
Uncle Clement also thinks that here in this same grave area, Jacob Judy Humphreys would have been born, so there would be 4 graves here. Jacob Judy Humphreys, buried here in this spot, would be Mike Humphreys and all the cousins' great-great-grandfather on the Humphrey side. 2 final notes about this grave site, and that is that no less an authority than Doc Humphreys, who was Eric Vinton Humphreys' brother and the son of Jacob Jr. Humphreys, stated that his grandfather was buried here on this, in this same plot, apparently without a marker. That would have been Jacob Judy Humphreys. Was also buried here, so there are 4 Humphreys graves in this location. To find this tombstone, you need to come up to the Reynolds graveyard from the location that we talked about, the intersection of 119 and the road over to Interstate 79. Come up the graveyard, find the largest obelisk in the downhill side of George Given Reynolds, and then walk and come to this tombstone commemorating 3 Humphreys. This graveyard is marked by some very large cypress trees, and we're now going to walk up the hill to the Brookmans' grave site, where Uncle Clement and Lori Jean are. We're now standing at the grave of Louis Brookman,
Grandma Liddy,
who was the father of Grandma Liddy, and his grave marker says Louis Brookman, July the 4th, 1870 to April the 3rd, 1896. And he died 2 years after Grandma Liddy was born. As a very young man, died from pneumonia.
Grandpa Humphreys told me that he sat with Grandpa Brookman while he died. And he said that Grandpa Brookman clapped his hands together in the fashion that we used to call shout and praise God. And he said Grandpa Humphrey said he shouted as long as he could, and when he couldn't get his hands together, he waved one hand, and he said I want you to pay, this is what almost everybody said, almost every will is prefaced with these words. I want you to pay my just and honest debts and take what is left for my wife and my little children. Now when he died, he had mother, she was 2 years old. He had Carrie, who would be about 4 years old, and Hattie, who would be about 6 years old. Now, this is all in writing someplace, and I'm not sure of that sequence. He had those 3 children, and then Grandma was, his Grandma Elizabeth James Brookman was pregnant with Addie. And since Grandma Brookman, they said she just went crazy when he died and just walked from the house to the barn and up and down the steps, wringing her hands and crying for days. And it was so bad that Grandpa Brookman sold out and moved to Charleston. And then when Addie was born, they took Addie to Charleston and raised her as a city girl. Mother has told me about, how well dressed Addie was and all those things when she came to the Wills Creek to visit, but they still maintained a relationship and knowledge of each other after they were women. Now when Grandpa Brookman died, Grandpa Burdett and Grandma were married soon after, and he made a home for my mother and Hattie and Carrie, along with his children. I've explained all of these things in a little brochure that I put together about the family. Mike has just reminded me that I forgot to tell you an important incident that occurred as Grandpa Brookman was dying. His last words were, according to Grandpa Humphreys, "I see Jesus in heaven on the right hand of God the Father." And he died.
Well, that's a wonderful testimony, because that means he died in the faith. Next to the grave of Lewis Brookman is the grave of his father and mother, William I. Brookman. William L. Brookman, thank you, born August the 14th, 1836, and died July the 5th, 1915. The inscription says he died as he lived, a Christian. And Adeline V. Brookman, born February the 11th, 1844, and there is no date of death on her tombstone.
Okay, now this Grandma Brookman was a Naylor, Adeline Naylor, and Grandpa married her after his first wife died, and they had Lewis, their only child, and she had great difficulty when Lewis Brookman died, and Grandpa then moved to Charleston. Grandpa Brookman was a relatively wealthy man, and you can go to the Kanawha County Courthouse and look at just page after page of buildings and lots that he owned in Charleston. He used to, my mother said, that he used to get up in the morning and dress and walk up to the triangle, what is known now as the Triangle on Lee Street. That's where the Capitol building was in those days, and sit there in that little park or around the Capitol and whittle and discuss politics with his friend, because he didn't have to work. He had the money. And when he died, he willed everything he had to his wife and to this daughter, Adeline, that they were rearing, because you remember that Grandma Burdett, was pregnant with Adeline when
Lewis died.
When Lewis died, and Grandpa and Grandma 'Brookman raised Adeline in Charleston. I have no idea where she's buried. I never thought about it before, or why they didn't bring her here.
This is the grave site of the young lady to whom Louis Brookman's wife was pregnant with whom when he died. Her name was Addie, and she was born September the 11th, and Louis Brookman died in April of 1896, and she was born 6 months later. The dates are Addie L. Brookman Lucas, September the 11th, 1896, May the 11th, 1915. The inscription reads, God in his wisdom has recalled the bloom his love had given, and though the body slumbers here, the soul is safe in heaven. She died when she was only 20 years old.
This is Aunt Addie. I've already told you about her. When Grandpa Brookman died, Grandma Brookman was pregnant with her, and Grandma, whose name also was Adeline, was greatly disturbed. So Grandpa Brookman moved away from Wilkesboro, and they took Addie and raised her as a city girl in Charleston.
This is the Jarrett Cemetery across the Elk River. We're now in the Jarrett Cemetery here at Elkview, and we've found some of the oldest graves in the family history. And this one reads, Owen Jarrett, born in memoriam May the 20th, 1790, departed this life July the 22nd, 1852, age 62 years, 2 months and 7 days. And buried beside him is the gravestone, is his wife. And the gravestone reads, Elizabeth Vincent, wife of Owen Jarrett, born 1789, died November the 25th, 1877.
We have just come from visiting the grave of my great-great-great-grandfather, Owen Jarrett, and his wife, Sarah Vincent Jarrett, where I could not remember his relationship to my great-grandmother, Nancy Melton James, and that's why we're putting this ad on this video. Okay, I just told you that Owen Jarrett was my great-great-grandfather. I'm the son of Liddy Brookman Humphreys and Eric Humphreys. My mother, Liddy, was the daughter of Elizabeth James. Elizabeth James was the daughter of Nancy Melton James and Louis James. Nancy Melton James was the daughter of Benjamin Melton and Sarah James.
Jarrett. Jarrett.
Nancy Melton was the daughter of Benjamin Melton and Sarah Jarrett. Sarah Jarrett was the daughter of Owen Jarrett and Sarah Vincent Jarrett. Okay?
This is the summer family picnic on July the 15th, 2000. There's Randy. There's Andrew. Wave Andrew.
Stacy.
Wave at the camera, ladies.
Wait a minute. On his
Where's Aunt Janet? Mark. Look at the camera, buddy.
There you
And a wave. Thank you.